Hi, folks. So I think we're ready to get started. So welcome, everyone. My name is Wynn Eakins. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the reading room assistant at the Library Company of Philadelphia. If this is your first time attending a Library Company of Philadelphia event, we're so happy that you could join us. And if you've attended another one of our programs, welcome back. For those who may not be familiar, the Library Company of Philadelphia, founded in 1731, is an independent research library concentrating on American society and culture from the 17th through 19th centuries. Free and open to the public, the Library Company houses an extensive non-circulating collection of rare books, manuscripts, broadsides, ephemera, prints, photographs, and works of art. Our mission is to foster scholarship in and increase public understanding of American history before 1900 by preserving and interpreting the valuable materials in our care. To that end, we host a wide range of free public programming, which is what brings us all here this evening. And so launched in 2020, when the Library Company was physically closed due to COVID-19, our Fireside Chat series continues as a platform that sustains and celebrates our diverse community of fellows, scholars, librarians, readers, and lifelong learners. Each chat highlights the extraordinary work of researchers who have drawn on the rich collections of the Library Company, and tonight is no different. So I'm really thrilled to welcome four distinguished archivists, catalogers, memory workers who will introduce themselves much better than I can. But joining tonight, we have John Anderies, who is the director of the John J. Wilcox Archives at the William Way Community Center. We have Krü Maekdo, founder of the Black Lesbian Archives and Queer Black Creatives. We have Em Ricciardi, cataloger extraordinaire and LGBTQ Subject Specialist at the Library Company, and KJ Rawson, founder and director of the Digital Transgender Archive. And so to our guests, if you have questions during the presentation tonight, I encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens or put them in the chat, and we'll address those questions after the presentation. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce these speakers, and we're going to have them go around the circle by last name, and I'll ask them to tell us their name, their pronouns, and introduce your collection by telling us about your favorite item in it.
Thanks, Wynn. Hi, everyone. My name is John Anderies, pronouns he, him, and I'm the director of the John J. Wilcox Jr. Archives and Library at William Way LGBT Community Center in Philadelphia. We're located just around the corner from the Library Company. So I have to say that my favorite item in the collection is usually like the latest. But I was giving this a little thought, and one that's been on my mind a lot lately is actually still, fairly recent. It came to us last fall. It's a collection of diaries written by a gay man who lived in Philadelphia for most of his life. And the diaries span from 1967 until 2022, when he died at the age of 75. He rarely missed a day. There are about 175 individual diaries in the collection, and that spans 55 years worth of journaling. It covers all manner of things, just his regular day-to-day, his inner thoughts, information on his family, friends, lovers, what he's reading, listening to, all of that. It's really quite fascinating to sort of, pick a spot and see what he might have been dealing with at a given time, or sort of look at it over time. And one of the really interesting things about it is that he would tuck ephemeral material into the diary, into the pages of the diary. And a lot of times this has, some meaning. It might be an obituary of someone he was close to, or it might be a photograph, or a program of something he had just seen, or even like a medical bill or something. There's just all manner of things. And I've been giving a lot of thought to sort of how the diary impulse is, really expansive and comprehensive, but the ephemeral nature of the items that are tucked in is much more sporadic and not necessarily meant to be kept long term. So I don't know, I'm just so fascinated by this collection, which is pretty unique.
I think we'll have Krü go next, if you'd like to.
Hey y'all, my name is Krü Maekdo. I am the founder of the Black Lesbian Archives. We are, I would say, an online based, pretty much all over the place. Right now, we don't necessarily have like a house or a place just yet, but eventually we definitely will. I would say my favorite piece, one of my favorite pieces of many would definitely be Vernita Gray, which I actually drop in the chat right now, from Woodstock to the White House. She was a Black lesbian in Chicago. She passed away years and years ago. Even though I didn't necessarily get to meet her, I always felt very connected to her spirit. She was a revolutionary a Black lesbian in Chicago, and out of the whole book, there was a lot of things that popped up for me, but I think one that significantly played a huge role in my own personal life with reading this book, especially because once it was given to me by Tracy Bain, which was one of the authors of this book, but just also her story, is when she actually opened her home to a lot of people in the community who were being kicked out of their homes. Due to various reasons, of course, but she also had a hotline, a suicidal hotline that they made in their home, and they were actually on the FBI list because of it. It was very controversial at that time, but they was doing, like I say, they was doing the Lord's work on that line and in that home. She had people sleeping in the bathtub. There was people sleeping like all over like this home that her and her roommate had, and so I just think that ability to be able to nurture and foster a community was very rich to me. They also were the first, her and her roommate were the first to actually throw a gay ball at their school at I think it was the University of Chicago at the time, and they did a toga party, and they was not expecting it to be as big as it was. They were making like pizza rolls and all this other type of stuff, and everything was like really on the hush hush at the time. And then like they said it was people coming out the woodworks. They said it was people, they was like, we didn't even know you were gay, we didn't even know, like, and then so it got so crazy that they literally had to shut the whole party down. So it was like she was definitely like just, and she did it so smoothly. She was such a smooth operator too with everything. So definitely Vernita Gray from Woodstock to the White House. So if y'all get a chance to check that out, definitely check it for sure. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Em, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Em Ricciardi, they, them pronouns. I am the cataloger and LGBTQ subject specialist at the library company. And much like John, I think my favorite item changes every time we get something new, but we got a very exciting item just this past month, which is a photograph archive of people transgressing gender boundaries through clothing. And the thing that I love so much about it is all of the pictures are so happy, which in our collection is a little bit rare. We don't have as much happy, affirming items in our collection right now. So finding this photo archive was very exciting. And one of the most exciting parts where there were 4 pictures where the people in the pictures had written their names on the back. And had written their married names as well in parentheses. And I was actually able to find all but 3 of them and found out that they were all in Cedar Rapids, Iowa around the 1910s decade. And it's pretty likely, we think, that they were in some sort of sorority together because the photographer, one of my coworkers, figured out that the photographer was taking sorority pictures. So I've just been really excited about this item that we just got.
That's amazing. Thank you. And also, Em showed me this item and it was beautiful. So I can't wait for the rest of you to see it. Hopefully it'll be digitized very soon. And KJ, would you like to go?
Yeah, that's a great segue, and it made me think, oh, we should talk about that. We'd love to link out to that too. So I'm KJ Rawson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the director of the Digital Transgender Archive. I also chair the Homosaurus project. And I want to follow the lead of my co-panelists and talk about a happy item. Well, I'll drop a link in the chat. So I get to show off some of our latest photographs. This is a photo of Marsha P. Johnson at her 45th birthday. And part of what I love about this photo and part of the series that it's in, and there are, we just posted a little over 100 photos of Marsha last week, and there's a whole bunch more coming. It's just that it's documenting trans vibrancy in a way that I just think is so fun and beautiful, and getting to see birthday parties and washing dishes and like the banality of life, but a life vibrantly lived. So I wanted to get a chance to share that.
That's a beautiful photo. Thank you so much. So I'm going to segue to our next question, which is, how did your collections begin? And what are some of the core subjects and formats that your collections offer? And you can just kind of pop around.
Okay, well, I'll start. The Black Lesbian Archives began, it would be 6 years this month, 6 years ago this month. Dang, when I say that, when it comes out my mouth, I'm like, wow, been a long time coming. I was at the time in Williamsburg, Virginia, staying with my auntie out there. And I was just doing like, something came over me to like really just do a huge deep dive. History's always been my favorite subject. So I wanted to do more of a deep dive and like as to who I am, who my ancestors are, you know, where we come from, where we've been. And at the time I was planning on moving from Williamsburg, Virginia to one of the major cities at the time for me, which was either DC, New York, or Chicago. And so the more I tried to like, you know, dig, like I was Chicago Black lesbians, like Black lesbians, da, da, da. I realized I'm like, wow, I was like, we don't really, there's not like a lot of information available on the internet, you know, for just, you know, who we are. So I was just like, this is interesting that it's not a lot of information, because I know that for the most part, we were like on the forefronts of a lot of these movements, right? So it kind of alarmed me a little bit, but then I also understood that there's some information that's just not, that sometimes just shouldn't be shared off the internet too. And I had to learn that along my journey as well. And so I did a deep dive on it. And then once I realized it wasn't a lot of information available, I started everything. I was like, I'm putting the Instagram up. I put the website up. I like any information I could find. I started to like become this hub of like digging and like seeking information. And anything I would find, I would just post it. I would be like, found something, post it, found something, post it. And then it just started to start these conversations around the stuff that was actually being pulled up. People started sending me stuff that they had, like, so something that started like out of a seed of curiosity, just me kind of understanding myself on a deeper level, just kind of evolved into something way bigger than I anticipated. And I just kind of rolled with it. And just over the years, it grew. I moved to Chicago shortly after that. And at the time, Kristen Kaza and one of her partners was having a exhibit. It was like the dyke spaces of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I ended up going to that. I reached out to Tracy Bain, who was at the time the director of the, not the Chicago Reader. She's of the Chicago Reader now. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I reached out to her about, you know, wanting to do more just exploration of archival work. She was like, you got to go to this exhibit. I was like, I'm already going. I'll meet you there. Met Tracy Bain, was there for the panel, met Pat McCombs, who's a legendary Black lesbian as well out there. And it just all kind of started from there. From then I took like about eight or 9 months to talk to the women of the Black lesbian community in Chicago about like their journeys and their stories of like what they were doing in these times. And then we ended up doing an exhibit at Affinity Community Services, which is one of the oldest Black LGBTQ centers that I know of that still exist to this day. I think they in their 35th year, I think, or something. Not sure. I gotta see. Don't quote me on that, Affinity. Y'all know I love you. Or maybe 40. Don't quote me on that. I gotta look at the website. But so did an exhibit there. And it was one of the most beautiful things I ever seen before in my life. There was people from like, you know, people in their 60s, 70s, you know, even 80s, you know, from people in a 1920, you know, years, and everybody was just coming together and just sharing like how they found affinity and how they found community in Chicago. And I was like, wow, like this, I mean, if we could share on this level like this, just through not only the material, but just art, through storytelling and things like that, I'm like, imagine what we can do on like a grand scale, you know, like how these stories actually could connect in a space of like actually healing each other through these different stories and things like that. So from then, we went mobile, and then now it's just kind of been this kind of on the road and doing like sporadic tours here and there. That's actually how I met Ainsley when I was in Philadelphia at the time. And I met you, John. I think, did I meet you, John, out there? I met you, John, like, and then KJ, like I met, yeah. So it's just been like a kind of like an unraveling since everything has started, and just kind of grew from there. So I think, is that all in the question? I think I got it. All right, y'all.
Anyone else welcome to hop in?
I'll pop in. I feel like our collection is sort of a weird one because we're probably the oldest and the youngest collection here, because the library company itself was founded in 1731. So we are one of the oldest cultural institutions in the United States. And we have been collecting continuously since that time. But our queer collection itself, I actually started just last February. So it is less than or just a little over a year old. So it is a very eclectic collection because we are pulling from our existing collection so far, and we have all sorts of subject specialties. We have books on law, we have books on popular medicine, we have a lot of fiction books, a lot of science and art books, and we also have a graphic arts department, so we have prints and photographs and all sorts of things. So it is just truly a very eclectic collection, and we are really only just now starting to identify our queer collection objects. So it is a little bit of a weird place to be in, as both we are very old, but this subject is very young for us.
I can jump in here quick to give a quick background on the Digital Trans Archive. So the DTA actually started similar to Krü's story in some ways, in that I was having trouble finding major collections of trans history. Trans history is at once everywhere and nowhere. It's certainly changed since that was my experience as a younger researcher 15 or so years ago. But you know, I really struggle to find, like, where do you locate trans histories? You have, you know, queer specific archives, and those have always been a great site to go to. But lots of trans histories are collected elsewhere, and often are sort of silenced or benignly neglected or sort of pushed off to the side. And so I wanted to start this project to really elevate the visibility of trans-related materials in collections across the globe. So the DTA doesn't actually have any physical collections. We are purely a collaborating project. We have 74 different archives that have contributed materials to the collections, which is awesome, including, you know, the William Way Archives and hopefully the Library Company very soon. And yeah, so a lot of what we do is to help sort of raise visibility, work with archivists to identify materials in their collections that might be relevant. Right now, we're working on a 3-year grant, which is focused on trans BIPOC histories. So we're in the process of digitizing over 20,000 pages of materials related to trans BIPOC histories, and it covers a really wide range of spaces, places, and communities. So that's the sort of backstory on who we are.
And I'll close this out and just say that the archives at William Way, well, the center itself dates back to 1976 when it first opened, and it had a library from the very beginning. The archives had a more sort of gradual evolution over time. There's not like a defining founding date. But I think we owe a lot to an activist named Tommy Avakoli Mecca here in Philadelphia, who had been going around to different gay and lesbian community groups and saying, here's what I know about the history of LGBT Philadelphia. What kind of materials do you have? Give them to me because I'm collecting them. And everyone trusted him, and so they did. And he had this just amazing collection in his apartment. When he moved to San Francisco in 1990, he donated the collection to the center. And in many ways, I think that's sort of the kernel of our collection, and we've been collecting ever since. So we have like personal papers and organizational records that are focused on the greater Philadelphia area. And then we have materials like newspapers, magazines, ephemera, and such, where we collect more broadly than just Philadelphia. And I think these materials sort of serve to provide context to the more local, deeper collections that we have. But yeah, it's a lovely, wonderful collection. I feel really pleased to get to work with it every day.
I just have to add a personal anecdote that I did an internship archiving Anita Cornwell. It's still in process, archiving Anita Cornwell's papers at the William Way John J. Wilcox Archives. And it's just an incredible space to be in as well, that has transformed so much over the years, thanks to the work of John and so many other organizers. So thank you for that resource. It's an amazing place.
Oh, thank you.
So we're also going to move on to our next question. And I wanted to ask, language and the way people in the LGBTQIA+ community describe themselves has changed over time. Even that acronym has changed over time. So I'm wondering, how does your institution balance updating language with honoring the way people have described themselves?
I'm happy to jump in first here. This is just something that's so complicated for us. Because there's competing needs from different users of the Digital Trans Archive. So we have materials of many folks who have passed, but lots of folks who are still alive. Some of those folks may use language to describe themselves that other folks who are visiting the collections find really offensive. So there can be this tension between people's self-chosen language and descriptors and identities and other people's terminology that they find offensive. So one of our core values is that people get to self-define and self-name. And we try to do our best to offer explanatory frameworks and use the archive to fill out every field that we can to help people understand the context for the materials that they encounter. But we always go back to that core value that whenever we are documenting people in our collections, we really try to stay true to the language that they use for themselves. So for example, Marsha P. Johnson used drag queen for herself. That was one of her, if not her main preferred term. And so we have that in many of the metadata records. We get some flack for that. So people will respond back and say, but she wasn't a drag queen. We'll say, well, language changes and the understandings of language change. So it certainly opens up a space for us to help to do some educational work. But most people don't reach out to us with those kinds of questions and feedback. So it can be really challenging to think through the limitations of the archive and think about the ways that we can kind of maintain some of that complexity of language. But for us, we're always going to try to do right by the folks who are represented in our materials as much as we can.
I'll pop in next. For the library company, I would say the bulk of our materials are pre-1890s, so sort of pre the modern definitions of sexuality and gender identities that we would recognize today. So this is something I have to think about a lot, not in terms of, I don't come across too many things that use very outdated terms. I more come across a lot of things that are very ambiguously queer, is what I would call them. So they're not, obviously queer. I'm sort of interpreting them as queer. And so for me, it's sort of a balancing act of how do I, describe things when it could really go either way. Like a great example would be, resources about Boston marriages. A lot of them, it is really hard to tell if it was just two straight ladies trying to escape the patriarchy and not get married and have financial independence, or if it was two lesbians who decided to have a romantic relationship with each other. So my philosophy is to just add every single description and subject heading that it could possibly be so that anyone can find it. So I would rather err on the side of too much description than not enough description. And I think I would do the same thing for when I eventually find things that use outdated terms. Like the one off the top of my head is the people who are gay used to be called inverts. We don't use that term anymore, but I would probably include it in descriptions for anybody who wanted to search that term along with the more modern terms, just so I'm covering all those bases.
No, I definitely feel that. Actually, I want to mention a conversation. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but a conversation that I had with KJ actually during some of the projects of the Homosaurus. I always want to say Homosaurus Rex. I don't know why I want to say that every time I hear that, but yeah, you kind of have my wheels turning with just even, and this is a conversation I've actually had over the coming months of like just how we describe ourselves as Black people, and talking about, well, Black is actually the color of our skin, but it's not actually the roots in which we actually originate from as a people. So that's one thing that I just want to mention. I'm not, like I said, I don't want to go too deep into that. That's actually a conversation I want to have, an extended version of, like getting back to our diaspora, of like our roots and the ways in which we are connecting to each other. But I think my focus with the BLA specifically, a lot of it honors everything from like the late 60s into like, I would say the early 90s. And even though language has like sporadically changed through that time, a lot of it is pretty concrete as to how people were like identifying. It's more so, if anything, a lot of language like hidden coded language. Like a lot of times, for example, when you used to hear sisters in the life, it was like a lot of times in the life was kind of described as, basically the community, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, even within that community in the life. So if anything, it's more like down coded, even to the invites and invitations they used to send to people's homes, so their families wouldn't know that they were actually involved in the community. And so a lot of them would be like women's centers of nonprofit, or like, it would be very coded. And then when you open it, it's just all this, rainbow extravaganza, kind of opening up the box. So yeah, it's very, like I said, the time I feel like is like the major focus with that, specifically with the BLA. It's pretty concrete as to what it's just a lot of uncovering, I guess you would say, in terms of the ways in which we like described ourselves and things like that. So very low key, if you will. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly that I've got a number of colleagues in area institutions that have done some amazing work at reviewing their own finding aids, for potentially harmful language or outdated language. And we haven't done any of that. I'm just, some days I'm just trying to keep my head above water. But the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries, PACSCL, of which we are a member and the library company is a member, will be doing an audit of member library finding aids. And I'm really excited about that. So I would love for someone to look at our finding aids and see how we've been doing. Totally into, having us take a look with fresh eyes at how we've done over the years.
I think that's actually such a perfect kind of transition to think about those harmful language statements for our next question. But archivists hold tremendous power. The act of building an archive is inherently political. So this next question is really to get into how have your collections played a role in historical and ongoing movements for LGBTQIA+ liberation? I know it's a big one. So.
Well, yeah, I'll jump back in and say that we definitely get a fair number of activists who come to use our collections, and that, maybe that they're simply like history nerds like the rest of us, right? But it may be that they have a particular interest in knowing what came before or learning from, the people that paved the way for them. So it's been wonderful to be able to, have our collections be open and useful to them. And there's one collection that we have that, is very much an activist collection. And one of the folders in it is basically a chart of what an activist organization did in terms of their various protests, and they evaluate it and they say, this is what we did well, this is what didn't work well, this is what we would change and do next time, this is what we had intended. And I think that's just an amazing resource for other activists to sort of look at and learn from. Yeah, so it's wonderful to be able to, provide that kind of opportunity for activism.
I can jump in here and say that I wish we had a better sense of how people were using our collections. I mean, we can look at, traffic and download statistics and things like that, but we often only get a sense when materials are used in a very public way. And in those cases, we've seen a lot of uses of our collections that are seeping into public discourse. And especially in this moment where trans communities are being attacked so directly, it's been really wonderful to see some of our materials being leveraged to respond to some of these obscene claims about how these things have never happened before and it's just coming out of the woodwork and trans stuff is so new, and we're all like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that people are actually making these claims with a straight face, unintended maybe. But so I think that really just like being able to see these materials be used for very direct and immediate activist purposes is really great, and it's helpful. But I also think it's really important to think about the longer kind of more simmering way that our work can enrich public discourse and kind of elevate public knowledge and education on LGBTQ+ issues more broadly, because sometimes it really takes a long time for that saturation point. But I think that, kind of making sure that these materials are accessible, not only to queer communities, but to broader publics for the purpose of education, exposure, and to really combat some of these claims that are made about the non-existence of queer and trans folks. I mean, I think that it's helpful both for the immediate term and also for kind of the long game.
Yeah, I'll jump on that as well. I think, we're so new, so we haven't really done that much outreach, I would say, but it's that same sort of, we've always been here. knowledge. If we are such an old institution, and the fact that I am finding all of these materials that we already owned and we have owned for 100 or so years, that speak to our queer communities, it just shows that this is not a new trend. This is not something that's just popping up in the past couple of decades. It's not the same language being used, but it is the same experiences happening. And I think that is extremely valuable, like KJ was saying, when, people are, the current discourse is so much about how, well, people haven't always been like this. They have, and we have evidence now. So I think that is extremely valuable for people.
Oh, that is a loaded question. I could name a couple of things, but I think one of the main things that stick out to me, anywhere between the stuff that was going on, I think globally, from Chicago all the way to Oakland, California, with the Ashe Project as well. I just think of women who were actually visionaries, with I would say into the context of like what was going on during these times prior to the crack epidemic, and also the AIDS and HIV epidemics that were happening during these times. Like, we literally had women that were not, because a lot of times what happens is, especially with the Black community specifically, and also Black lesbian communities, we get so focused on like the fight and the struggle that we don't actually understand that there were like women who were visualizing a world that went beyond the context of which society was trying to project onto them to live. Like, and I know it sounds loaded just saying that in general, but like, these were women that were not only building homes for like mental health and wellness clinics and centers like that. These were women who were also teaching other people how to like defend themselves through like martial arts, and like they were talking about spiritual development and like actually being in a state of healing so we can actually heal our communities on a global level. I think of like the Ashe Project when they were going back and forth from like Oakland to Berlin, Germany, and there were women flying back and forth from these places to like learn about what was going on in Germany at those times, especially when Audre Lorde was out there, and actually uncovering Afro, or what they called Afro Germans and things like that at the time, and bringing those communities together, and then bringing them over to Oakland, and then like just being in this constant sense of like communal, not only living, but communal, I like to say like awareness as to what's going on in each other's communities. It was really big. It was a really big time, and I think a lot of what happens is when we start to seek this kind of liberation within our communities, there's always something that like seemingly seems to drop into the masses at such a time when there's like peak climax of change going on, that it literally disrupts the ground. And so I say this all to say, I feel like the collections and the material within these archives, the stuff that I've learned and pulled out, it's just a lot to learn from what has happened in the past. So we don't have to necessarily, it's not to say that we can't take what we have in these times and like build off of those, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, there's just so much rich culture and history that we can take from these things that we have learned and like bring those back into where we're at now presently and future forward moving, so we can actually strategically strategize in the ways in which we want to build and foresee our communities and these generations that are literally springing up after us in the future, and like how that actually looks and how that can go. So when we talk about the tremendous power of like the knowledge and wisdom that holds the keys from this material, it's such a key to like our futures. And so I would just say this before we move on to the next question. I mean, if you not only the resources that, that available from my particular collection of the BLA and just within it, or just anybody's that you see. If you know some elders that are still alive and you've taken interest in actually getting to know their stories and stuff, reach out to talk to them. And and on top of that, they really want to tell you their stories for real. If you just give them the opportunity to sit down and speak with them about it, but get to know like not only what was going on in their lives at the time, but the things that they seen, the things that they were going through, the type of communities that they were a part of, and how they were building within those communities, because they have a lot of knowledge to give. And I know, we've had this kind of battle of the worlds with the newer generation and the older generation and things like that. But if we put our differences aside and actually just listen to each other, and like what information that we can actually learn from each other versus it being like a kind of a wall there between the bridge, it's just a breadth of knowledge that we can really pull from these times. And that's what I want to kind of give to that for sure. So
Krü, thank you so much. I also just want to uplift one of the things I'm really hearing strong in what you're saying, which is just like actionable deliverables. I'm currently at the Caribbean Studies Association conference, actually, and that is a major theme of just how to connect across different queer lives, different Black lives, different Caribbean lives, actionable deliverables. And that is so much informed by oral history. So thank you for that invitation for our audience. I want to move to our next question. And I think you've really, Krü really went in on this question, I think, without without us even getting to it yet. So I'll pass them the mic first if they want to add anything to this next question. But our next question is, with queer lives presently under attack, on the ground and in legislation with, different anti-trans bills and book bannings and so much violence going on right now. How do you use your collections to respond to current struggles?
on there, okay. To come back on there for real. No, thank you. And that's so dope that you're out there. You said it's a Caribbean conference?
Yes, I'm definitely going to tell you about it very soon.
Yeah, I need to hear about that. I told you I just came back from Trinidad and Tobago. You gotta tell me all about that for sure. Yeah, I think a little bit of what I said previously kind of definitely answered this question. I do feel like it's, man. First of all, I just want to just send love to everybody, during these times right now, because it's a lot going on out here. And I know we try to keep a brave face, and try to kind of soldier through a lot of this stuff that's going on. But if you need to take a break, please take a break. Like, shut your phone off if you need to, shut the news off if you need to, and just disengage. And I say that to y'all as I say that to myself, because it can be just overwhelmingly and a lot, but I digress. I think that documenting current struggles, I think that that's been something that's been significant throughout. I would say this collections and material that has come through specifically with the BLA. But I think I kind of want to go back to something that KJ said the last time we talked over here, what we were just kind of talking about, versus like more so documenting those current struggles is more so like using this breadth of knowledge that we have to actually elevate, and I guess more so foresee and envision what we want to be happening within our futures. Because like I said, it's so easy to kind of get stuck in the struggle, not to say that we don't have them or we can't acknowledge them, but it's like, what can we actually do to ascend from this current state of struggle to an actual society and community that is actually more so building each other up in a state of building, than more so like tearing each other down and fighting each other and things like that. So I think honestly, collectively, I see or foresee it would be nice to actually come together on like our collections and things like that, to actually get to know, like, more so, like, I know we have like our own individual things going on, but like, well, what's going on in not only your collection, but what's going on in your community, you know, like using our collections more so as a bridge between worlds, more so than like, oh, well, I have my collection over here, you have your collection over here. Like, how can we actually bring this breadth of knowledge together from not even just the US, but even people in the Caribbean and in different places internationally, and actually figure out how we can actually build and put these different pieces of the puzzle together. Like, where in history did things go a little array, right? What was happening on your end in the 1700s? What was happening on your end in the 1800s? How can we like cross these different barriers and like actually come together and like rewrite history, if you will, in these spaces, in these ways? So I think actually bridging the gaps between not only what we have and what we have seen throughout our histories, but just coming together in a collective in collective spaces and ways to really and honestly genuinely help each other in kind of seeing where the patterns might have failed us in the past, and like just bridging for something a little bit more solid and concrete and stronger moving forward is what I foresee. Yeah.
I can pick up on that too, because I just love everything that Krü just mentioned. And I think, you know, it's easy to get bogged down in all of the terribleness, especially right now. But I'm looking at Christine's question too, and thinking about, you know, how we can extend care to young folks and really be anticipating the needs of young people in this moment. And one of the things that I think is really important for those of us who do work in information environments and in history in particular is we can offer, Hill Malatino calls archives, queer archives, resources for resilience, right? So we can offer our collections as a wellspring of resilience, because so often when we look back at the moments where queer and trans communities have faced the most turmoil, you see the most community building and you see the most connecting, and folks really working across different issues in solidarity and in lockstep to support one another and to advance shared struggles and shared concern for human rights and community. And so, you know, there's a few different ways we can look at our moment. And if we look back to history, we can see that this moment could be full of opportunity for the kinds of connecting and community building that Krü is talking about. One of the things that we try to do to especially reach out to young folks is we realize that some of our materials are not especially friendly to all users who come to our site. So for example, we have, you know, lots of links out to oral histories, almost 600 links on our site to trans-related oral histories. And because there's so many great projects that we just get to link out to and help facilitate access to. So what we are trying to do is we're working with one of our collaborators, Outwards, which is an LA-based oral history project. And we're taking, I think, 8 oral histories that are, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 hours long, and we have like an 8-minute version. So trying to put into more digestible sizes, pieces from the collections, again, to just sort of offer these resources for resilience out to anyone who might need them during these challenging times, and also be able to see that there's this like great web of folks who support each other, who support young people in particular, and who are really committed to kind of coming together to get through this moment.
And so just while we have this little gap before either Em or John, if you want to add your question, I just want to do a time check and say that we are at 6:52 right now. We're definitely going to go a little bit over, but I just wanted everyone to know what time it was and let our audience check in with themselves too. But we can go ahead and continue.
I'm going to pass on this question because I think personally what Krü and KJ have said has been so incredible. I think I'd like to leave it for me with with those words.
Yeah, I concur. I guess the only thing I would add, I would love to see more institutions like the Library Company, so not queer focused, have been around for a really long time, been collecting all sorts of materials, do the sort of work that we're now doing, which is deep dive into your existing collections and pull out those queer histories, because they really are all over the place. And it's a lot of work, I can attest, but it is extremely rewarding finding these items in existing collections and being able to offer them out, as like KJ was saying, histories of resilience.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, because I think that ties in perfectly to the last question I'm going to ask for now, before we get to the chat, which is, what do you see as the future for your collections, and where do you hope to take them next?
On the road. Well, future forward wise, I definitely would like to, one collection that I really loved to see, and I thought that was a beautiful idea, especially in the ways in which we share, is the Lesbian Horror Story Archives in New York. I loved that idea of having a home, like the home, like walking into a home space where it's like comfortable, like you feel like at your grandma's house or something like that, and like you can just sit, and it's just material everywhere, and it was such a relaxing, homey presence to like just be in. So like when I was just thinking about like future forward wise, I was like, it would be dope to really have like spaces around the world where you can actually go into, and like I've even worked in hostels and stuff like that. So like I think it would be dope to like have it to where you have like it's the material there, but also people can actually stay there in the space for like long periods of time and actually do like study work, like study the work in material and things like that for long periods of time, as long as it's taking care of the home, of course, in this space. But just being able to have spaces like that in the future for sure. But then mobily, the Black Lesbian Archives since 2020 was going on a mobile history tour on a school bus, but then 19 kind of came around and watched a lot of stuff. So I've been kind of in the rebuild process of making things a little bit bigger and a little bit more streamlined for the future. So I just want to say this for the participants out there, that there's anybody that has a plug on a school bus, a medium-sized 7 to 9 window school bus, and wants to take us on a Miss Frizzle ride on the Magic School Bus, I would definitely appreciate that. And if anybody has any resources, I already have a place to build and materials and stuff like that to actually build out the bus or the tool materials. But if anybody has like any extra materials that they could lend to the build out, and then also just finding the school bus itself, please let me know. It's definitely been a process of like trying to find the right bus and things like that, but definitely going on tour so we can actually bring the material to different cities and actually do like storytelling stuff off the bus, podcasting, performances, talking about like agriculture and the land, and how we like actually are going to have to be, which people are, but having to grow our own resources and herbs and plants and things, and like just getting back to the root, the grassroots and things. So that's future forward when I'm looking for the Black Lesbian Archives, and also just to being able to pass these stories down through books, and like going back to like the grassroots of like I don't know if it's zine or zine, I don't know what those are called, but even going back to making like little zines and zines that people can actually pass around to each other to kind of spread the information out, just using all different types of media to really like expand that reach to where even if I pass on, or whoever takes over passes on, like we can still be in a continuation of like sharing information with each other, so we continue to know about each other, so there's not this huge disconnect as to who am I, where did I come from, who are my ancestors, what were they doing in these times. We could just keep that momentum going. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the BLA future for moving, and just making sure that we can collect as much as we can before our elders pass on, for sure.
So one thing that's next for our archive is that our center is undergoing a capital campaign at the moment, working towards a major building renovation project. So in our immediate future is packing up and moving all of our collections off-site while the building undergoes some really significant changes. So when we come back to the building, I think we'll probably be off-site for maybe a good couple of years. When we come back to the building, I mean, hopefully it'll be this amazing new space that will be incredible for our collections, but I'm sure there'll also be some challenges there as well. Anyone moving into a new building knows. But we're thinking right now a lot about how people will interact with the collections in the new space. Certainly, as they have in the past, as researchers in the reading room, going to exhibits and things like that, but also finding ways to bring elements of LGBTQ history and the archives out into the building, around the building, blown up large on walls, or artwork in little nooks or what have you. So it's a really, really kind of exciting project for us.
I'm just excited to keep going. We're so new. It's great to have so much work to do. I think at this point I've identified positively about 70 collection items at the library company, and I have a spreadsheet with 200 more that I need to go through and actually figure out if they qualify, and that spreadsheet's just going to keep growing, which is very exciting. And I'm also just really excited to have more researchers come to our library to do this sort of specific queer history research. We've had a few come by lately that I've been able to talk with and hear about what they're interested in, and they've been great and given me ideas of things to add to that spreadsheet. And I'm just so excited for more people like that to come visit us.
Did everyone answer? Is that?
I answered in the chat, so.
Oh, you did. Okay, excellent. Thank you. And so I'll move over to some of those chat questions. KJ, thank you for answering so many of them already. I wanted to give everyone a chance to answer one of Christine's questions that I really like. Christine Nelson, how do you think your archives can best serve young people, especially teenagers, who need to be able to have access to the stories you preserve?
I'll just say that I really enjoy when young people come and want to use the archives, and it actually happens fairly frequently. Certainly high school students, more and more middle school students. One anecdote is that this was before the pandemic, but my director called me up and said, John, I have 2 students here who are doing a report on the early AIDS epidemic, and they've been talking to me about that, and could I send them up to the archives? And I said, oh, sure, of course. So they knock on the door, and I open the door, and it's 2 4th grade girls, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, that's possibly the youngest researchers we've had. And I thought, and then I had to think, what did I just pull for them to look at? And, was it all appropriate? And so it was really a wonderful experience to have those kids in the archives, and they were just fantastic. They had great questions, and they knew a lot more than I would ever have imagined that they knew.
That's beautiful. That sounds amazing. Em or Krü, did you all want to chip in with that one, or should we move to the next question? Okay, I'm going to move over to our next open question, which is from Joe Schwartz, which is, how have you been able to shine a light on your individual collections for the larger gay and other communities? I've become familiar with the work in this orbit, and he recognizes how this history informs our lives presently, and archives, being a consequence that many don't realize. So I think the main question, though, is how have you been able to take your collections and shine a light on them for larger communities?
I wrote down a couple of things here, just briefly. Exhibitions have been amazingly helpful at helping people in the community to understand what's in the collection, what kinds of things we might have, how parts of their history, might come together to tell a compelling story. Instagram has been amazing. We've just ballooned with followers there, and that's just been amazing as well. And I think the researchers that we have end up, leaving after they've done their research, and they go and tell their colleagues and from around the country or around the world about our resources. And so they've been sort of evangelists for the work that we're doing and the collections that we have. So I'm very thankful for them.
Yeah, events like this. I've been trying to organize more events with the library company to just let people know that we're doing all of this wonderful work and that we're not the only ones, and building bridges across different institutions.
And I think we want to join that bus tour, Krü. So
yeah, no, definitely. Once it's on, I'm not making no more announcements. I'm about to Beyonce this whole entire tour. I'm just letting y'all know right now, because every time I make an announcement, it's like something is like, and I'm like, ah. So once it's on, it's on. I'm gonna tell y'all that right now. But I think I definitely agree with John too. I think a mix of like exhibitions, even online speaking, like this, like Em was saying, also speaking engagements, specifically like catered around or creating speaking engagements or be invited to speaking engagements where you can actually bring some material. Social media always, Instagram, Facebook, anything that's connected to something else, Twitter, if you could just blast it on everything as well. And then even just doing like in-person events and stuff like that too. Like I was talking about just like the tours, like that's how I met Ainsley, was through actually setting up a tour. We went from, we did New York, Philly, and DC. So we actually physically drove up, from, at the time I was in Columbus, Ohio, and actually drove up to these places and did a full-on tour where we actually brought the material, opened up the trifold, sat it down, people could come up and actually interact with the material, ask any kind of questions they wanted to about the material. We got to actually tour the library too at the same time. And that's funny that you was talking about Anita too, because that was what Ainsley was actually showing me when I came to the library when I was there. So, and rest in peace, to Anita. She just passed away actually I think it was a couple of days ago. But yeah, so it just, I think just making yourself active and present in the material, it's one thing to house it at an actual place, but it's another thing to actually open it up to the public, for people to be able to like view and like really interact with. And heavy on the interaction too, I just want to say, allowing people to, it's one thing for people to just be able to like see it and view it, but it's another thing for people to be able to like actually interact with the work that you are actually putting out. We live in such, and I tell people all the time, and I'm gonna keep this short, I promise. We live in such a time where we live in a community where, or a society where it's easy to scroll. Like we have like attention spans like an ant. Well, let me not go on the ants because they're actually very focused. Of a fly. I'll say a fly. We have attention spans of a fly. So it's very hard for people when they're scrolling like that to actually take in the information that they're actually looking at or sitting with. So making spaces available for people to learn in the various ways in which we learn. Some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, some people are like so tapping into those different forms and actually putting those things on display, I think is a beautiful way to shine a light on the material and how we actually receive it as well.
I want to thank you, Krü, and thank you, John, for bringing Anita into this space. Anita passed on May 27th, and John, thank you for putting the link to the obituary in the chat. So I hope everyone has a chance to read that. So it was just an incredible person, incredible life. And I wanted to touch on, just respond to what Krü said too about opening it up. That ties so much into, I think, your earlier comment about making places feel like home, and that being such a organic way for people to interact with, with information. And yeah, events like this do this work. So thank you to Em for organizing this and just having the initiative, and for Allison as well, who you all can't see but is behind the camera there, doing a lot of work to help put this together. So I hope that we can continue doing events like this. I feel like there's so much more to talk about. We're running out of time, so maybe we'll have a part 2 or something. But this was an amazing conversation. Thank you all. I do want to just add, I think we just got 2 questions in, so I'll let our speakers read through those and hopefully reply in the chat. Unless we want to add 5 more minutes, y'all can discuss. But I want to say, for anyone who hasn't heard their question read out loud in the last 10 minutes, make sure to check your chat and see if one of our archivists replied to directly. So I will quickly read through these questions, and I'm going to ask our speakers to pop your emails into the chat real quick again, or if anyone who's in the talk wants to scroll up, you can see how to see everyone's websites and everything earlier up in the chat. But since we are running behind time, I'm going to say we're going to skip these questions for now, but thank you to everyone for asking. And if you can just forward those questions to the folks who want to answer them. I can't speak for anyone, but I'm sure people would be happy to reply individually. So I'm going to call it. We're at 7:10, we're about 10 minutes over, but thank you all so much for attending, and we hope to see you at more Library Company events and getting involved in all of these incredible organizations. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, and thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Wynn. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.